The afternoon sun beat down on the highway as Staff Sergeant DeAndre Williams guided his black Dodge Challenger into the right lane. His muscles ached from morning training at Fort Bragg, and all he wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and spend the evening with his wife and kids. The car's engine purred smoothly, and he couldn't help but smile. 6 months ago, buying this car had felt like a dream. After 2 deployments and countless sacrifices, he'd finally saved enough to get something nice. The gas gauge blinked at him, nearly empty. DeAndre spotted a gas station and flipped on his turn signal. He parked at pump 7, turned off the engine, and stepped out. His camouflage uniform stood out among the casual clothes everyone else wore, but he didn't mind. He was proud to wear it. As the gas pump clicked and whirred, DeAndre stretched his arms and rolled his shoulders. Tomorrow was his day off, and he planned to take his daughter to the park like he'd promised. The thought of her excited face made him smile. That's when he noticed the police car. It rolled slowly through the parking lot. DeAndre didn't think much of it at first, but then the cruiser circled back, slower this time, and he could feel eyes on him. He looked down at his uniform, then at his car. Everything was normal. He tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. The gas pump clicked off. DeAndre replaced the nozzle, screwed his gas cap back on, and reached for his door handle. Before he could touch it, he heard a sharp voice behind him. "Step away from the vehicle." "Hands where I can see them." DeAndre froze. His heart jumped as he slowly turned around. 2 police officers stood about 10 feet away, hands resting on their holsters. His military training kicked in. Stay calm. Don't make sudden movements. Comply. But his mind raced with confusion. "Is there a problem, officers?" DeAndre asked, keeping his voice steady. "We need you to step away from the car now." The first officer, tall with graying hair, spoke with cold authority. The second officer, younger, moved to the side. DeAndre took 3 slow steps back from his car. "Can you tell me what this is about?" "We received a report about this vehicle," the older officer said. "Black Dodge Challenger. Matches the description of a stolen car." The words hit DeAndre like a punch to the gut. Stolen car? His car? The one he'd spent months saving for? The one he'd researched for weeks before buying? He felt anger bubbling up but forced it down. Getting angry wouldn't help. He'd seen too many situations go wrong because of anger. "Officers, this is my car," DeAndre said carefully. "I bought it 6 months ago. I have all the paperwork inside. My registration, my insurance, everything's current." The younger officer spoke up. "That's what they all say. Why don't you show us some ID?" DeAndre reached slowly for his back pocket, announcing his movements. "I'm reaching for my wallet now. My military ID is inside." He pulled out his worn leather wallet and extracted his military identification card, handing it to the older officer. The officer barely glanced at it. "This just shows who you are. Doesn't prove the car's yours." "The registration is in my glove compartment," DeAndre explained. "It has my name on it." Everything matches. By now, more people at the gas station had noticed the commotion. A woman with 2 kids hurried them into her minivan. Someone in the parking lot had their phone out recording. DeAndre felt heat rising to his face. He was a decorated soldier, and here he was being treated like a criminal in front of strangers. "We're going to need to verify everything," the older officer said. "Give me your keys." "Sir, this is my property." "Do you have a warrant?" DeAndre knew his rights. The younger officer stepped closer. "You refusing to cooperate? That's going to make this harder for you." "I'm not refusing. I'm asking what probable cause you have. You said there's a stolen vehicle report." "Can I see it?" The 2 officers exchanged glances. The older one spoke into his radio, calling for backup. DeAndre's stomach dropped. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars pulled into the gas station, lights flashing. 4 officers now surrounded him. The crowd of onlookers grew larger. Phones pointed in his direction. DeAndre stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his head, a position he'd learned from too many traffic stops over the years. A detective emerged from one of the new cars. He approached DeAndre with authority, looking him over. "I'm Detective Morrison. How'd you come to be driving this vehicle?" "I bought it," DeAndre said simply. "From a dealership. 6 months ago. Everything's legal." "And what do you do that you can afford a car like this?" The detective's tone dripped with skepticism. DeAndre felt something crack inside. "I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Army. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I saved my money and I bought this car legally. Mind if we take a look inside?" It wasn't really a question. DeAndre watched as officers moved toward his car. One tried the door handle, locked. They looked at him expectantly. Am I being detained? Am I under arrest? DeAndre asked. We're conducting an investigation. You're not free to go until we verify ownership, Morrison said. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The hard way. DeAndre knew what that meant. He'd seen it happen to too many people who looked like him. He thought about his rights, about justice, about everything he'd fought to protect overseas. And here he was in his own country being treated like he didn't belong. Fine, DeAndre said quietly. The keys are in my pocket. I'll get them out slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his key ring, the small American flag keychain his daughter had given him dangling from it. Detective Morrison snatched the keys and tossed them to the younger officer, who moved to unlock the car. As they searched through his vehicle, pulling out his gym bag, his lunch cooler, and the stuffed bear he'd bought for his daughter's birthday next week, DeAndre stood there feeling smaller with each passing second. Other customers whispered and pointed. Some shook their heads in sympathy. Others just stared with curiosity, like he was some kind of spectacle. The younger officer emerged from the car holding DeAndre's registration and insurance card. He handed them to Detective Morrison, who studied them even though the sun was still bright. The detective's face remained impassive as he read DeAndre's name on both documents, matching perfectly with his military ID. Says here you live on Oakwood Drive, Morrison said slowly. That's a nice neighborhood. Pretty expensive. DeAndre clenched his jaw. My wife works too. We save our money. And with all due respect, sir, how much I make isn't relevant to whether I stole my own car. Watch your tone, the younger officer snapped. We're just doing our jobs. And I'm just trying to get home to my family, DeAndre shot back. You've seen my registration. Everything matches. What else do you need? Detective Morrison walked around the Challenger, examining it from every angle. He peered into the windows, checked the license plate, even kicked the tires lightly. DeAndre watched him, confusion mixing with his anger. Run the VIN, Morrison finally said to one of the other officers. More waiting, more staring, more humiliation. DeAndre glanced at his watch. Almost 40 minutes now. His wife had probably tried calling. She'd be worried. The officer running the VIN check came back, shaking his head. Vehicle's not stolen. Clean record. Registered to DeAndre Williams at the address on his license. Silence fell over the officers. DeAndre waited for an apology, for some acknowledgement they'd made a mistake. Instead, Detective Morrison simply handed back his keys and documents. You're free to go, he said flatly. That was it. Oh, sorry, no explanation. No admission they'd wasted his time and embarrassed him for no reason. That's all? DeAndre asked, his voice shaking now. You accuse me of stealing my own car, search my vehicle, and all you say is I'm free to go? Morrison's jaw tightened. We were following up on a report. What report? DeAndre demanded. Show me the stolen vehicle report. Give me a case number. The officers looked at each other, uncomfortable silence spreading between them. He made a decision in that moment. If they wanted to treat him like he was nothing, he'd make one call, just one. And everything would change. DeAndre pulled his phone from his pocket slowly, making sure every movement was visible. The officers watched him like hawks, their bodies tense, ready to react to any sudden motion. He'd been in enough dangerous situations overseas to recognize when people were on edge, and these officers were definitely on edge. I'm going to make a phone call, DeAndre announced clearly. Just one call before we go any further with this, Detective Morrison scoffed. This isn't an arrest. You don't get a phone call. Then I'm free to use my phone, DeAndre replied calmly. His thumb scrolled through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Colonel Patterson, his commanding officer, a man he'd only called outside of duty hours twice in 5 years, both times for emergencies. This qualified as an emergency. The phone rang once, twice. DeAndre's heart pounded in his chest. Pick up. Please pick up. Staff Sergeant Williams? The colonel's voice came through, professional but surprised. Is everything all right? Sir, I apologize for calling on a Saturday evening, DeAndre said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. But I have a situation and I need your help. The younger officer rolled his eyes and muttered something to his partner. Detective Morrison checked his watch impatiently, clearly annoyed at the delay. Go ahead, Williams. What's going on? The colonel's tone shifted, sensing the seriousness. DeAndre explained the situation in clear, concise terms, the way he'd been trained to deliver reports. The gas station, the accusation, the search of his vehicle, the lack of any actual stolen vehicle report. As he spoke, he could hear the colonel's breathing change on the other end of the line. "Put one of the officers on the phone," Colonel Patterson said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Now." "Sir, my commanding officer would like to speak with you," DeAndre said, extending his phone toward Detective Morrison. Morrison waved his hand dismissively. "I'm not talking to anyone. We're in the middle of an investigation." "Detective Morrison," DeAndre said, his military bearing showing through despite his civilian situation. "My commanding officer is a full bird colonel at Fort Bragg. He's asking to speak with you. I strongly suggest you take this call." Something in DeAndre's tone must have registered because Morrison snatched the phone from his hand with obvious irritation. He stepped a few feet away, pressing the phone to his ear. "This is Detective Morrison," he said gruffly. "Who am I speaking with?" From where DeAndre stood, he couldn't hear the colonel's exact words, but he could see their effect. Morrison's face went from annoyed to confused to something that looked like concern. The detective's posture changed. His shoulders straightened. His free hand moved away from his belt. "Yes, sir, I understand that, but we received a report." Morrison began, then stopped. He listened for a long moment. "No, sir, not exactly a stolen vehicle report. It was a suspicious person call. Someone said—" He trailed off again. The other officers had noticed the change, too. They exchanged worried glances. The crowd of onlookers had grown even larger, and several people were still recording everything on their phones. DeAndre stood perfectly still, his arms at his sides, waiting. "Yes, sir, we did verify the registration," Morrison continued, his voice noticeably less confident now. "It does match his name and address." The VIN came back clean. Another long pause. The detective's jaw clenched. "I understand, sir." "Yes, sir, I will." Morrison walked back over and handed DeAndre his phone, not quite meeting his eyes. "Your colonel wants to speak with you again." DeAndre took the phone. "Yes, sir? Are you injured, Williams? Did they harm you in any way?" The colonel's voice was sharp with concern. "No, sir. I'm fine. Just shaken up." "Good. I've made it very clear to Detective Morrison that you are one of my most trusted soldiers. I've also made it clear that I will be contacting his chief of police first thing Monday morning to discuss why one of my decorated service members was treated like a criminal for the offense of driving his own vehicle." The colonel paused. "That car, by the way, the one they're so concerned about? I was with you when you bought it. Remember?" DeAndre did remember. The colonel had taken a personal interest when he heard DeAndre was shopping for a car, had even gone to the dealership with him to make sure he got a fair deal. It was one of those moments that had meant more to DeAndre than he could express, having his commanding officer care enough to spend his Saturday afternoon helping a staff sergeant buy a car. "I remember." "Sir?" DeAndre said quietly. "I told the detective that too. Now, are they letting you leave, or do I need to make more calls?" DeAndre looked at Morrison, who was now conferring quietly with the other officers. They all looked uncomfortable, like kids who'd been caught doing something they knew was wrong. "I think they're letting me leave, sir." "Good. Come see me Monday morning, first thing. We're going to document all of this properly. And Williams, I'm proud of how you handled yourself today. You kept your cool in a situation that would have broken other men. That takes real strength." "Thank you, sir." DeAndre managed, his throat suddenly tight with emotion. The call ended. DeAndre pocketed his phone and looked at the officers surrounding him. Detective Morrison cleared his throat. "You're free to go," he said stiffly. "Just like that?" DeAndre asked. "No apology? No explanation for why you pulled me over, searched my car, and treated me like a criminal in front of all these people?" Morrison's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. "We were responding to a call. We have to follow up on reports." "A what report?" DeAndre pressed. "You admitted there was no stolen vehicle report. So what was it? Someone called because they saw a black man in a nice car and assumed I must have stolen it." The silence that followed was damning. None of the officers would meet his eyes. The crowd had pressed closer, hanging on every word. Someone shouted, "That's messed up!" Another voice called out, "Let the man go home." The younger officer who'd been so aggressive earlier spoke up, his voice defensive. "We're just doing our jobs. We get calls, we respond. That's it." "Your job is to protect and serve," DeAndre said quietly. "Who are you protecting today?" What were you serving by humiliating me in public when I hadn't committed any crime? No one answered. Detective Morrison gestured to the other officers, and they began moving back toward their patrol cars. Just like that, they were done with him. Case closed. Move along. DeAndre stood there for a moment, watching them retreat. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with him. He'd been so focused on staying calm, on not giving them any reason to escalate the situation, that he hadn't let himself feel the fear. Now it crashed over him in waves. An older black man approached from the crowd, his eyes sad with understanding. You okay, son? Yeah, DeAndre said, though he wasn't sure it was true. Yeah, I'm okay. That was wrong what they did to you. We all saw it. The man gestured to the crowd. A lot of folks got it on video. You need any of that footage, you just ask around. We'll make sure you get it. DeAndre nodded, grateful. Thank you. I appreciate that. As he climbed back into his car, his phone buzzed with a text from his wife. Where are you? Dinner's getting cold. He stared at the message for a long moment, trying to figure out how to explain what had just happened. How do you tell your family that you were treated like a criminal for driving the car you worked so hard to buy? How do you explain that the uniform you wear proudly, the service you've given to your country, meant nothing to those officers until someone with more authority forced them to see you as human? DeAndre started the engine and pulled out of the gas station slowly. In his rearview mirror, he could see people still gathered, still talking, still recording. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. DeAndre's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as he drove home. Every time he saw headlights in his rearview mirror, his heart rate spiked. The 15-minute drive felt like an hour, and by the time he pulled into his driveway, his shirt was damp with sweat. The front porch light was on, warm and welcoming. Through the window, he could see his wife moving around inside. For a moment, he just sat there trying to compose himself. He didn't want to walk in looking shaken, but the front door opened before he could pull himself together. His wife, Tanya, stood in the doorway, her expression shifting from annoyance to concern. After 12 years of marriage, she could read him like a book. What happened? She asked as he climbed out. She met him halfway across the lawn. Baby, what's wrong? I'm fine, he started to say, but his voice cracked. And then standing in their front yard under the porch light, everything came pouring out. He told her about the gas station, the officers, the accusations, the humiliation. Tanya listened with her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes growing wider. When he finished, she pulled him into a tight embrace. Thank God you're okay. If you'd reacted differently. She didn't finish. They both knew how these situations could end. Daddy? His daughter's voice came from the doorway. 7-year-old Kenya stood there in her pajamas. You're home. DeAndre wiped his eyes quickly and forced a smile. Hey, princess. Sorry I'm late. Did you bring me something? Kenya asked, running toward him. He thought about the stuffed bear in his car, the birthday present. I did, but it's a surprise for next week. Kenya bounced excitedly. Can I have a hint? Nope, he said, scooping her up despite his exhaustion. She was getting too big for this, but he didn't care. He needed to hold his daughter right now. Inside, his teenage son Brandon sat at the kitchen table doing homework with headphones in. He pulled one earbud out when DeAndre entered. Dad, can you help me with this algebra problem later? I've been stuck on it forever. Sure thing, buddy. Give me a few minutes. DeAndre set Kenya down and she ran off to play. He caught Brandon watching him with a strange expression, the kind of look that said the boy had inherited his mother's ability to sense when something was wrong. But Brandon didn't push, just put his earbud back in and returned to his homework. After Kenya was in bed and Brandon had retreated to his room, DeAndre sat with Tanya at the kitchen table. She'd reheated his dinner, but he could barely eat. His phone kept buzzing. You need to look at this, Tanya said, sliding his phone toward him. Videos from the gas station were everywhere. Different angles, all showing the same thing. DeAndre being stopped and searched for existing while black. One video had been shared thousands of times. The comments section was on fire. Some people expressed outrage. Others made excuses for the police. Reading those comments felt like being punched repeatedly. People are calling for the officers to be fired, Tanya said. This is going viral. He scrolled through more videos, more comments. Part of him felt validated, but another part felt exposed. His worst moment was now entertainment for millions. I don't know if I want this, he admitted. I just wanted to go home. I just wanted to pump my gas and go home. Tanya squeezed his hand. I know, but maybe something good can come from it. Maybe this time there will be consequences. Maybe this time things will actually change. DeAndre wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that speaking up would matter, that his humiliation would lead to something meaningful. But he'd seen too many viral videos, too many promises of reform, too many hashtags that faded away after a few weeks. Still, the alternative was staying silent, and silence had never changed anything either. His phone rang. An unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Is this Staff Sergeant Williams? A woman's voice, professional and warm. Yes, this is he. My name is Patricia Chen. I'm a reporter with Channel 7 News. I've seen the videos from yesterday, and I'd like to interview you about what happened. We're doing a comprehensive story about racial profiling and traffic stops, and your case highlights exactly the kind of systematic issues we need to discuss. DeAndre looked at Tanya, who was watching him carefully, letting him make his own decision. I need to think about it. Absolutely, I understand this is difficult, but I want you to know that we're committed to telling this story fairly and accurately. The public needs to know what happened to you, what continues to happen to people like you every day. Here's my direct number. Call me when you're ready to talk, or if you decide you don't want to participate at all. Either way, I respect your choice. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. After he hung up, 3 more reporters called within the hour, though none of them felt as genuine as Patricia had. Then came calls from activists with local community organizations who wanted to organize protests. Then a lawyer who specialized in civil rights cases offered to represent him pro bono. The attention was overwhelming, like being caught in a flood he hadn't seen coming. DeAndre turned his phone off and sat in silence, trying to process everything. What are you going to do? Tanya asked. I don't know. Part of me wants to forget this ever happened, pretend it was just a bad day and move on. But then I think about the next black soldier who gets stopped, the next kid who gets searched for no reason, the next father who has to explain to his son why being black means being treated differently. If I stay quiet, does that make me complicit in letting it continue? You're not responsible for fixing the entire system, Tanya said firmly, taking both his hands in hers. You didn't ask for this. You don't owe anyone your story or your trauma. It's okay to protect yourself and your family first. But what if sharing my story actually helps someone? What if it prevents this from happening to someone else, or at least makes people more aware? I keep thinking about that video. All those people watching, maybe they need to see it. Maybe they need to understand that this isn't just something that happens in the news. It happens to real people with families and jobs and lives. They talked late into the night, weighing the pros and cons, discussing the risks to their privacy and their children's safety if he went public. By the time they went to bed exhausted and emotionally drained, DeAndre still hadn't decided what to do. Sunday morning came too early. DeAndre woke up to find Brandon at the kitchen table with his laptop, reading articles about the incident. His son looked up and DeAndre saw fear in his eyes. Dad, is this what happens when you drive? Cops just stop you for no reason? DeAndre sat down heavily. This was the conversation he'd been dreading, the one his father had with him. The talk about being careful, keeping your hands visible, the talk no parent should have to have, sometimes, son. Not always, but sometimes. But you didn't do anything wrong, Brandon said. You're in the Army. How can they treat you like that? I don't have a good answer. Brandon was quiet, then asked, Are you going to do something? What do you think I should do? His son looked at him seriously. I think you should tell everyone. My friends don't understand what it's like. They think racism is history, but it happened to you yesterday. It could happen to me when I start driving. That decided it. If his son could be brave enough to face this reality, then DeAndre could be brave enough to speak up about it. He turned his phone back on. Dozens of missed calls. He found Patricia Chen's number and typed a text. I'll do the interview. When and where? The response came back within seconds. Thank you for your courage. Tomorrow afternoon? DeAndre looked at his family. Tanya gave him an encouraging nod. Brandon looked proud. Kenya wandered in asking about pancakes, blissfully unaware of the storm ahead. Tomorrow works, he typed back. Then he added, but understand something. This isn't just my story. It's the story of every black person treated like a criminal for existing. Every parent who's had the talk with their kids. If you're going to tell my story, tell all of it. Monday morning arrived with the weight of expectation. DeAndre put on his dress uniform, the one with all his medals and ribbons. If he was going to do this interview, he wanted people to see exactly who he was. Not just a black man in an expensive car. A soldier who'd served his country with honor. Tanya adjusted his collar. You look good. Professional. Like the hero you are. I don't feel like a hero, DeAndre admitted. I feel like I'm walking into a battlefield without cover. You've done that before and came home. You'll get through this too. Before leaving for Fort Bragg, DeAndre stopped by Kenya's room. She was getting ready for school, struggling with her shoelaces. He knelt down to help her. Daddy, why are you wearing your fancy uniform? I have some important things to do today, Princess. Are you going to be on TV? Her eyes went wide. DeAndre hesitated. Maybe, would that be okay? Yes, that would be so cool. He smiled despite the nervousness in his stomach. To her, this was just exciting. She didn't understand the weight of it. He hoped she never would have to. At Fort Bragg, Colonel Patterson was waiting in his office. He stood when DeAndre entered. How are you holding up, Williams? Honestly, sir, I've had better weekends. The colonel gestured for him to sit. I spent yesterday making phone calls. To the police chief, to the mayor, to city council members. I wanted them to understand this isn't just about one incident. What did they say? The chief was defensive, made excuses about procedures. But when I asked him to produce the stolen vehicle report, he couldn't, because it didn't exist. They stopped you based on an anonymous suspicious person call. That's it? DeAndre felt his jaw clench. So they profiled me. That's exactly what happened. Colonel Patterson leaned forward. The two officers who stopped you have been placed on administrative leave. Detective Morrison is on desk duty. It should have felt like victory, but it felt hollow. For how long? Then they're back on the street doing the same thing? That's where you come in. Your interview today keeps pressure on the department to follow through. Without public attention, these things disappear. DeAndre nodded slowly. I'm meeting the reporter at 2. Good, and Williams? Don't hold back. Tell them everything. This is your story. Own it. The news station wasn't far from base. DeAndre arrived early and sat in his car gathering courage. His phone buzzed with messages of support from fellow soldiers and friends. Some messages were less supportive, telling him to stop complaining. He stopped reading those. Patricia Chen met him in the lobby. She was younger than expected, maybe early 30s, with an earnest expression. Staff Sergeant Williams, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy. Call me DeAndre. And no, it's not. But it needs to be done. She led him to a small studio. A makeup artist touched up his face, and then he was sitting across from Patricia, a microphone clipped to his uniform. We're going to have a conversation, Patricia explained. Just you and me talking. Try to forget about the cameras. I want people to see the real you, to understand your experience. Ready? DeAndre took a deep breath. Ready? The interview lasted over an hour. Patricia asked thoughtful questions, giving him space to explain not just what happened, but how it felt. She asked about his military service, about his deployments overseas, about his family waiting at home, about the moment he realized the officers weren't going to believe him. No matter what documentation he showed them, DeAndre found himself sharing things he hadn't even told Tanya. Emotions he'd been keeping locked down since Saturday afternoon. What went through your mind when they accused you of stealing your own car? Patricia asked. DeAndre paused, really thinking about it. Honestly, my first thought was about my kids. I thought about my son, who'll be driving soon, and whether this is what his life is going to be like. Whether I need to buy him an older, less nice car so he doesn't attract the wrong kind of attention. I thought about my daughter, who thinks her daddy can fix anything, and how devastated she'd be seeing me treated like a criminal. And I thought about every other black person who's been in this situation, who didn't have a commanding officer to call, who didn't have videos to prove their innocence, who just had to endure it and move on because speaking up felt too dangerous, or because no one would believe them anyway. Do you think things will change? I want to believe they will. But wanting something and seeing it happen are two different things. Real change requires people in power to admit there's a problem, and then actually do something meaningful about it. Not just sensitivity training or policy reviews that look good on paper, but don't change how officers interact with people in the streets. Not just statements about thorough investigations that quietly go away after the news cycle moves on. We need accountability. We need consequences. We need officers to understand that they can't treat people this way just because they think they can get away with it. What do you want people to take away from your story? DeAndre looked directly at the camera. I want people to understand that this isn't rare. This isn't an isolated incident. This is what it's like to be black in America, even when you've served your country, even when you've done everything right, even when you're just trying to pump gas and go home to your family. And I want other people who've experienced this to know they're not alone. I see you. I believe you. And your story matters too. When the interview ended, Patricia shook his hand warmly. That was powerful. Really powerful. This is going to air tomorrow night, and I have a feeling it's going to reach a lot of people. DeAndre drove home feeling emotionally drained, but somehow lighter. He'd said what he needed to say. Now it was out of his hands. That evening, the police department released a statement. DeAndre read it on his phone while sitting at the dinner table. The statement acknowledged that the stop may have been handled inappropriately and promised a thorough investigation. It was carefully worded, admitting nothing concrete while appearing to take the matter seriously. May have been? Brandon read over his shoulder. They stopped you for no reason, searched your car and humiliated you. May have been. That's how these things work, DeAndre said tiredly. They never admit fault until they absolutely have to. But by late evening, something shifted. One of the bystanders who'd recorded the incident came forward with additional footage, showing the officers laughing and joking after DeAndre left, with one clearly saying, "Should have seen his face when we told him we were taking him in." The audio was damning. It showed they'd never really believed the car was stolen. They'd just been messing with him because they could. This new video spread even faster than the originals. The carefully worded police statement suddenly looked even worse. By midnight, the mayor had called an emergency press conference for the next morning, and all 3 officers had been suspended without pay pending a full investigation. DeAndre watched the news coverage with his family gathered around him. This was bigger than he'd anticipated. This was becoming something that couldn't be ignored or swept under the rug. "Daddy, are you famous now?" Kenya asked, confused by all the attention. "No, princess. I'm just someone who refused to be silent." Tanya squeezed his hand. "You did good today. Really good." As DeAndre got ready for bed, he checked his phone one last time. Among the hundreds of messages was one that stood out. It was from another soldier at Fort Bragg, someone he barely knew. "Thank you for speaking up. The same thing happened to me 2 months ago, but I was too scared to report it. Seeing you stand up gave me courage. I'm filing a complaint tomorrow." DeAndre stared at that message for a long time. Maybe Patricia was right. Maybe his story would reach people. Maybe it already had. The interview aired Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. DeAndre sat with his family in the living room, watching himself on screen. It felt surreal, seeing his own face, hearing his voice talking about the worst moment of his life. Kenya watched with wide eyes, not fully understanding, but sensing the importance. Brandon sat forward, completely focused. Tanya held DeAndre's hand tightly. When it ended, the room was silent. Then Brandon spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Dad, that was incredible. You were so brave." "I was terrified," DeAndre admitted. "That's what makes it brave," Tanya said softly. Within minutes, DeAndre's phone started ringing. His mother crying, then his sister, then fellow soldiers. The messages kept coming, hundreds of them. Most were supportive, sharing their own stories. Some were hateful. He tried not to read those. By Wednesday morning, the interview had been viewed over 2 million times online. News outlets across the country picked up the story. Cable news debated police reform. The hashtag Justice for Williams flooded social media. The pressure intensified. DeAndre went to work at Fort Bragg that morning, hoping for normalcy. Instead, he was met with a standing ovation. Soldiers he'd served alongside lined up to shake his hand. "You did what a lot of us have been too scared to do," one sergeant told him. "That took guts." Colonel Patterson called him in mid-morning. "Williams, I wanted you to hear this from me. The mayor just announced a press conference. All 3 officers have been terminated, effective immediately." DeAndre sat down heavily. Terminated? Not suspended? Fired. Gone. The video of them laughing afterward sealed it. The department couldn't defend them anymore. There's also going to be a full review of traffic stop procedures with new training on racial bias. It was more than DeAndre had expected. "What about the investigation? Don't these things take months?" "Usually, yes. But between the videos and witness statements, the case was clear. The department knew they couldn't drag this out with the whole country watching. DeAndre felt a complex mix of emotions. Relief that there were consequences, but also emptiness because no amount of justice could undo what he'd felt. There's something else, Colonel Patterson continued. The NAACP wants to honor you next month. Veterans organizations want you speaking at their events. A civil rights organization wants to partner with you on a campaign about racial profiling of service members. I don't want to be a professional victim, DeAndre said quietly. It doesn't have to define you. But you have a platform now, Williams. What you do with that is up to you. That afternoon, DeAndre watched the mayor's press conference from his office. The mayor stood at a podium looking uncomfortable but resolute. After a thorough review, we have concluded that the officers involved acted inappropriately and violated department policy, the mayor read. Effective immediately, Officers Robert Chen and Tyler Brooks, along with Detective James Morrison, have been terminated. The mayor announced new policies, mandatory bias training, body cameras, and an independent review board. It sounded good on paper. DeAndre hoped it would translate to real change. The press asked about criminal charges. The police chief hedged, saying the district attorney was reviewing the case. DeAndre knew that meant probably not, but at least they'd lost their jobs. That evening, DeAndre received an unexpected visitor. An older black man in a suit knocked on his door, introducing himself as Attorney Harold Mitchell. Staff Sergeant Williams, I've been practicing civil rights law for 30 years. I'd like to represent you in a lawsuit against the city. DeAndre invited him in. Tanya joined them at the kitchen table. I appreciate the offer, DeAndre said, but I'm not sure I want to drag this out in court for years. I understand, but this isn't just about you anymore. A lawsuit sends a message that there are financial consequences. It hits the city budget, which makes politicians pay attention. Tanya spoke up. Could we use any settlement to create something positive?
Like a scholarship fund?
Mitchell smiled. Absolutely. Many of my clients do exactly that. DeAndre thought about Brandon, who'd be driving soon, about Kenya growing up, about all the other families who'd experienced this. Okay, he said finally, let's do it. But this isn't about getting rich. This is about accountability. Over the following weeks, life gradually returned to normal, though DeAndre was recognized everywhere now. Some people thanked him. Others avoided him. He learned to live with both. He spoke at forums about police reform. He met with young black men who'd had similar experiences, offering encouragement. He partnered with a veterans advocacy group to create a resource guide for service members facing discrimination. 3 months later, DeAndre received a letter that made him cry. A high school teacher from another state explained she'd shown his interview to her class. A white student had approached her afterward, saying he never understood what his black classmates meant about being treated differently. But after seeing DeAndre's interview, something clicked. The student went home and had a real conversation with his parents about racism for the first time. Your willingness to share your story is changing hearts and minds, the teacher wrote. Thank you for your courage. DeAndre showed the letter to Tanya. Maybe this is why it happened, he said. Maybe this is the purpose. Or maybe it happened because of systemic racism, Tanya said gently. And you're just making the best of a terrible situation. Both things can be true, she was right, but it helped to think his pain had meaning, that it was creating ripples of change. 6 months after the gas station incident, the lawsuit was settled. The city agreed to pay a substantial sum without admitting wrongdoing. DeAndre and Tanya used most of the money to establish a scholarship fund for children of military families who'd experienced racial discrimination. They called it the Justice in Service Scholarship. The 3 fired officers tried to appeal their terminations, but the appeals were denied. Detective Morrison took a security job at a mall. The 2 younger officers left the area. DeAndre never went back to that gas station, but he kept driving his Challenger, refused to let them take that from him. Every time he got behind the wheel, he thought about that Saturday afternoon, about how close things had come to going very differently. 1 year after the incident, DeAndre was promoted to Master Sergeant. At the ceremony, Colonel Patterson presented him with a special commendation, not just for his military service, but for his courage in speaking truth to power. Leadership isn't just about what you do in uniform, the colonel said to the assembled soldiers and families. It's about standing up for what's right even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, it's about using your voice to create change even when that voice shakes with fear. Master Sergeant Williams exemplifies that kind of leadership. He faced injustice and didn't back down. He spoke up when staying silent would have been easier. He turned his pain into purpose. That's what real courage looks like. The room erupted in applause. DeAndre stood at attention, his family watching from the front row. Brandon had grown taller, nearly matching his height now. Kenya held a small American flag she'd insisted on bringing. Tanya's eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling with pride. Later that evening, after the ceremony, DeAndre stopped at a different gas station to fill up. As he pumped gas, a young black man in uniform approached him. "Master Sergeant Williams, I wanted to say thank you. I saw your interview last year. It made me feel less alone. I've been stopped 3 times for no reason since I enlisted. Each time I remembered what you said about staying calm, knowing your rights, not letting them make you feel less than human. Your story gave me strength." They shook hands and the young soldier walked away. DeAndre stood there for a moment, feeling the weight and privilege of what he'd been able to do. As DeAndre climbed back into his Challenger, he realized something important. He'd spent so much time thinking about being a victim, but the truth was more complex. Yes, he'd been wronged. Yes, the system had failed him. But he'd also found his voice and created change. He wasn't just a victim. He was a survivor, a fighter, someone who'd taken the worst moment of his life and transformed it into something meaningful. He'd turned humiliation into education, fear into courage, silence into a voice that reached across the country. He'd shown his children that standing up for justice matters even when it's scary. He'd shown his community that one person can create ripples of change. He'd shown himself that he was stronger than he'd known, and that made all the difference.